The Rambam goes through the history of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and he makes a very interesting point, which is that with the completion of the Talmud, with the completion of the composition of the Talmud Bavli, there was a great cataclysm in Jewish life. Beyond that point, there was a scattering, a dispersion of Jews to the extent that there no longer was a central authority. So you had Botei Din, you had courts that had jurisdiction over areas, limited areas, and they could make takonas, they could make ordinances and laws, but these were not binding on the entire Klal Yisrael. They were binding on the regions where these Botei Din had authority. Now it's interesting to know that they had authority at least for their regions. But what would the basis of that be? Now, the Torah says that the Bezdin Hagadol, which is the Bezdin of all of Klal Yisrael, there's a halacha of lo sosum and a dover. You can't swear from their psak. Pi Ateresh or Yerucha is to say to follow their ruling. What is the basis for the authority of a local Bezdin? The Ram doesn't tell us. And there's a drasha from the Ram where the Ram says we derive it from the pasuk of Acharei Rabban Lahatais. The pasuk says you follow a majority of a Bezdin, that means any Bezdin, and that teaches us that a local Bezdin has jurisdiction over its locality. So perhaps the Ram will agree to that source. So the Rambam says that the Bezdin of Cairo could make ordinances for the Jews of the region of Cairo, and the Bezdin of Paris could make takonas for the Jews in the region of Paris. But there was no central authority that could legislate for the entire Klal Yisrael. The last time such a thing existed was when the Talmud Bavli was written. Now, at that time there was no Bezdin Hagadol. The Beis Hamikdash had been destroyed. The Jews no longer were in Yerushalayim. The Gemara seems to tell us that the authority of the Bezdin Hagadol is very much bound with its being located in the Makom Hamikdash. The Gemara says, "Melamed shal Makom Goyrim." The seat of the Bezdin Hagadol is in Yerushalayim in the Beis Hamikdash. But the Rambam says something very surprising. The Rambam says that since Roiv Chachmei Yisrael, since the majority of sages of Klal Yisrael accepted the Talmud Bavli, therefore it is binding on all of Klal Yisrael. And it's very interesting that the Kesef Mishnah is often quoted as saying the same thing. It's Kesef Mishnah as Mamrim that says that is the authority of the Talmud Bavli, and it's not pointed out. The Rambam himself says it in the Hagdama to the Rambam. It's an oddity that the Kesef Mishnah should say this on his own, but really the Rambam says it. Because the Mishnah is discussing a very interesting question. That the Rambam Paskas Nochas Mamrim that a Bezdin Hagadol gives a ruling, an interpretation of Torah. What happens if a subsequent Bezdin Hagadol chooses to differ? They say, we believe that the earlier ruling is a mistake. So the Rambam says that the later Bezdin can overturn the ruling of the earlier Bezdin. Now, it doesn't mean that an individual can do that. It's the ruling of the Bezdin Hagadol. It can be overruled by a Bezdin Hagadol. By analogy, the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm an American. I guess in Canada it works the same way. A Supreme Court ruling is binding. A subsequent Supreme Court can review the holding and overturn it. But a lower court can't, because it doesn't have the authority. But a Supreme Court can. In other words, it's not like the Pope. The Pope is infallible. It's not just that his rulings are binding. He's infallible. So, Pope Benedict has a very serious problem. If he wishes to overrule a holding of an earlier Pope, how can that be? The earlier Pope is not just that his rulings are binding. He's infallible. He can't make a mistake. So if he can't make a mistake, how can I say he made a mistake? That's why the Catholic Church is kind of painted into a corner on certain issues such as celibacy and so on and so forth. In other words, the Supreme Court isn't that way. It's not infallible. Its rulings are binding, but a subsequent Supreme Court can overrule them. So we probably will see this someday, or maybe not. Maybe not in our lifetime. But there may be some decisions that are overruled. I mean, let's put it this way. Let me correct myself. We certainly will see it. We'll see it going the wrong way. We'll probably see some liberal rulings that will overturn some earlier conservative rulings. I would have hoped the other way, that we should see some conservative rulings that overrule some liberal rulings. That we probably won't see in our lifetime, but the way things are going. But this is, by analogy, what the Rambam says, that a Bezdin HaGodol can overrule the rulings of an earlier Bezdin HaGodol. But it has to be an equivalent authority. So the Kesef Mishnah asks a question, so why can't we argue on the Gemara? Why can't we argue on the Gemara? So let's understand the question. What the Rambam is saying is like this, that an equivalent authority can argue with an equivalent authority. So to argue with the Bezdin HaGodol, you have to have the power of the Bezdin HaGodol. But the fact that the earlier Bezdin was greater isn't the issue. Every subsequent Bezdin HaGodol has the same authority. So when it comes to the Talmud, what gives the Talmud authority? The Talmud wasn't an enactment of the Bezdin HaGodol. It was just the rabbis. So we're also rabbis. So why can't we argue with the Talmud? So the Kesef Mishnah says, because since the Talmud was accepted by Roiv Chachmei Yisrael, it is considered the equivalent of an enactment of the Bezdin HaGodol. And therefore we don't have the authority to repeal it, because we're only rabbis, we're not the Bezdin HaGodol. So it's interesting that it should follow that in theory, if Roiv Chachmei Yisrael today would gather, they could repeal the Talmud. Because just like Roiv Chachmei Yisrael then had the power of the Bezdin HaGodol, so Roiv Chachmei Yisrael today should have the power of the Bezdin HaGodol. And even though we're not as great in stature, in theory, we could overrule the Talmud. And this question was asked by the Chazon Ish to Rabbi Breitowitz in a famous exchange of letters. That Rabbi Breitowitz wrote a little piece called Kuntres Divrei Seifrim, in which he quotes this Kesef Mishnah. And Chazon Ish wrote him a letter. Chazon Ish was a young man at the time. Wrote him a letter that it follows from your explanation that if Roiv Chachmei Yisrael would gather together, they could repeal the Gemara, and that's certainly a very, very odd thing to say. And Rabbi Chanan answered back, and Rabbi Chanan, when you analyze his answer, he really said that you are correct, but only in theory, because when a person chooses to argue, you have to assume that you're qualified to argue. And for us to try to take on the sages of the Talmud would be foolhardy, to say the least. So in other words, there is no halachic proscription to overturning the Talmud. It's just that it would be crazy to try to do it. Because if we can't even understand what they're saying, how are we going to have the chutzpah to disagree? But in theory, that should be the case. But this is what the Kesef Mishnah says. But the reality is the Rambam himself says it, and therefore the Talmud is binding. And therefore, it's a very interesting thing that there is a convention which is assumed that we don't argue with the Rishonim. The earlier medieval commentators, till the Shulchan Aruch was written in the 1400s, early 1500s, we don't argue. So we don't argue with Rashi, we don't argue with the Rambam, we don't argue with the Ramban, we don't argue with the Rashba. Then, when the Shulchan Aruch was written, we enter the era of the Achronim. So it's assumed that we are within the era of the Achronim. So if we choose to argue with Achronim, that we can do. We don't argue with the Rishonim. And then some will introduce a division within the era of the Achronim themselves. That the early Achronim we won't disagree with. We're not going to argue with the Magen Avraham in Shulchan Aruch. But we may argue with a halachic decisor of the last century. But in theory, there is no prohibition of doing that. In theory, one could argue with Rishonim. There's no halacha that you're not allowed to argue with Rishonim. It's just, again, you're foolhardy if you do. The Talmud you can't argue with, because the Talmud is considered the psak of the Bezdin Hagol. But if you have a Rishon who gives an interpretation of the Talmud, and you believe the interpretation is different, in theory you'd be allowed to argue with him, but you'd be a fool to do it. Because you have to assume that the Rishon knows better. Certainly he's closer to the source. He may have a Masorah as to what the Talmud meant that we don't have access to. But it's different. It's not a halachic prescription. It's just that it doesn't make sense. In the same way, for example, if you go to a doctor, and the doctor says that for your condition you need to take this medicine and this therapy, you're free to argue with him. There's no halachic obligation to listen to the doctor, but you're out of your mind if you do, because this person has gone through years of training, practice. He keeps up with all the latest developments in the field. You're just an amateur. Maybe you read something in the newspaper that was written by an equally uninformed person. So to assume you know better is just reckless. But there is no proscription in terms of law that obligates you to listen to the doctor. So it's the same thing with the Rishonim. The Rishonim, we have to assume knew better. So for us to argue would be, again, as I said, reckless. But the Talmud you can't argue with. You're not allowed to argue with. That's considered the psak of the Bezdin Hagol. Now the Rambam goes on and says that with the further dispersion of the Jewish people, we reached a stage where even the understanding of the Talmud has become problematic. There's very few people understand what the Talmud means. And he writes, to master the Talmud requires a broad mind and a wise soul. It requires a lot of time. And nowadays, because of the tsaras, the troubles, we don't have that. We don't have that. And anybody that's engaged in Talmud study knows that sometimes to clarify a single small point might take hours and hours and hours and hours of research. We don't have it at our fingertips. The real experts know. I have to tell you a story that Rabbi Breitowitz told me once that brings it out. We were discussing the following issue. I had seen that a person had written a sefer on the halachas of Eruv Tafshilin. Mr. Eruv Tafshilin, when Yom Tov falls out before Shabbos, to be able to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos, make an Eruv Tafshilin. It's one chapter in Shulchan Aruch, one siman in Shulchan Aruch, and this person wrote a 300-page sefer, and it's like every possible shaila. But the interesting thing is that he quotes many sources. This from Moshe Feinstein and from this person to this person. So I said, look, there's a paradox here, because this person probably has spent much more time delving into the intricacies of Erev Tafshilin than any of the people he quotes. I mean, this person must have reviewed those 2.5 blat in the second paragraph of Be'ah 1,000 times with all the Rishonim again and again and again and again and again. This person should be rightfully the greatest expert in Erev Tafshilin. Yet the sources he bases his book on are people that probably spend a small fraction of the time delving into halachas of Erev Tafshilin. So really, it would have made much more sense if he would have written an original work, right, with his own ideas, and not rely on other authorities, because if anything, he should know it better than them. That was the question I raised. So Gadli said, no, it's not true. The people that really know don't have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to clarify every point. They just know. So the amateurs, they're the ones that have spent thousands of hours working it out. So he told me a story to illustrate the point. So he knew a fellow who was going for his PhD in physics. And he was working for 2 years on his dissertation. And one day he read that there was going to be a conference in that city, and there was a Nobel Prize winner who was coming to the conference who had done work in a very closely related field. So he figured it would be a golden opportunity to meet this Nobel Prize winner and discuss with him his work. So he emailed the fellow Says, I'm a graduate student, I'm doing my work in this field, and I understand that you're coming to town for this conference. It would be really a privilege if I could meet with you and discuss my work. So the fellow emails him back, my pleasure. Says, let's have breakfast together, such and such day of the conference, and you'll tell me what you're doing. So the day arrives, and they get together for breakfast, I guess a restaurant and a hotel, and they're having a little chit-chat, and finally the Nobel Prize winner says, okay, so tell me what you're doing. So he tells him, doing this, and this. The fellow looks at him and says, that doesn't make any sense. He pulls out a napkin, writes a few equations on the napkin, and says, it doesn't make any sense. 2 years of work down the drain. The point is, the people that really know, they know. Right? They don't have to look at it. They have an intuition. They understand what makes sense. So likewise, if I wanted to write a Sefer Erev Tavshilum, I would probably have to spend years and years and years and years and years delving into it and analyzing and thinking about it. And says, but the people that really know, the people that are really experts, the Moshe Chaim says, so they didn't have to spend years in Erev Tavshilum. If he spent 3 hours in Erev Tavshilum, he knew it 10 times better than this fellow knew it, and therefore he could be the source for the rulings in that Sefer that was written by the person who would have to struggle for years to even understand what Moshe was saying.
So what is that? Is that just because if you engage in a certain level of thinking on a continuous basis, you develop a kind of insight?
I think that it is that way. I think there is a intuition you have. Let me give you an example. You learn a Gemara. Let me give a mashal. If I would tell you that a cow is like a table. So what does it mean a cow is like a table? So several interpretations present themselves. One is, well, just like a cow has 4 legs, a table also has 4 legs. One possibility. Another possibility, just like a cow gives milk, a table also gives milk. Right? It's also a possible interpretation. Now, the question is, do you have to now analyze the various possibilities and demonstrate why the one is true and the other is false? Or can you just intuit which one is the correct interpretation? That's an extreme example. But very often you'll see a lot of analysis really is devoted to the elimination of possibilities that shouldn't require elimination. In other words, a person who really knows zeroes in on the correct interpretation without having to refute and discuss the alternatives. And you see this in Sfarim. You see Sfarim will devote tremendous amounts of attention and pages to the refutation of possibilities that really should not require refutation. Because you should just know. That's the way it is. Sometimes it's frustrating. You go to such a person and you'll ask him, why not X? And he'll just tell you, because that's not the way it is. It's Y. Why is it Y? Everyone knows it. You read the Gemara, that's what it says. Maybe not. Maybe the Gemara means this. But, to the person who has that keen intuition, it's like saying, maybe the table doesn't give milk. It's a funny thing, but I think it does come with time and practice. And
it's a definition.
And also, I think there's another aspect to it. That when you have a mastery of Kol HaTorah Kula, when you have broad knowledge, I think that the arrangement of the knowledge and the integration of the various components is something which takes place in the brain almost without thinking. So the Divrei Torah, Aniyim b'makom echad v'ashir b'makom acher. Because I'll say that Divrei Torah are poor in one place and rich in another place. What is locked here is open there. I mean, that all comes together for the person who has the broad knowledge, and those of us who only are focused on the subject at hand don't have access to that.
That's what I was going to say, is that they have such a storehouse of knowledge that they have instant access to all the possibilities and can zero in much quicker than the average person.
Yeah, I think it's because they have access to things that the person who is researching a specific topic wouldn't even think of looking at. Right? Because it's I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was looking at a tumim in the Hilchas Eidos, and it's talking about the laws of people who are valid witnesses, not valid witnesses. And we know that a person who does certain averos becomes disqualified to be a witness. So there's a Gemara in the Sanhedrin which talks about people that buried they were grave diggers, and they buried someone on the first day of Shavuos, on Yom Tov. And the question is, are they disqualified? Aren't they disqualified? And the Tumim has a discussion, what exactly is the prohibition of burying somebody on Yom Tov? Is digging a grave in Nisid Daraisa? Is it Nisid Rabbanon? No, it's not discussed on that particular page in Sanhedrin. But it's related to the Sugi and Shabbos, and it's very complicated because it depends on the Machlokes Rishonim, how to learn Pshat, and several Gemaras and Shabbos, and etc. But a person who knows Kol HaTorah Kula has that in his fingertips, so he doesn't have to delve into burning half of Masechah Shabbos to understand this question as to whether digging a grave on Yom Tov is Nisid Rabban, Nisid Daraisa. In other words, he has that, so therefore it can immediately be applied to the subject at hand. If I needed to research this issue, learning Hilchos Eidos, I would have to put on Masechah Shabbos and start grinding away. What is it? Which is it? No. So at this point, I'd just rather trust the Tumim, who comes out that is only Nisid Rabban. But or the person who really knows, really would know. Okay, so the Rambam says, therefore, because of this fact that the ability to master the Talmud has been lost, therefore I have decided that I'm going to put together a work that will cover everything. And he writes that Binosi, this is on page Dalet, the last page, the second line of the first line of the left column. V'nishanti ala tzur baruch hu, relying on the rock, meaning God blessed be He. Binosi b'chol elu asfarim, I have delved into all these works, the Talmud and the Tosefta and so on and so forth. V'ro'isi lechaber dvarim hamizbarim b'chol elu, and I decided to compose the matters that are clarified from all these chiburim, v'inyan ha'asr v'amutra atomei v'atar, regarding that which is prohibited, permitted, impure, pure, imshar dini atara, all the other halachas of Torah, kula entirely, b'lash brura, clearly put, b'derech ktsara, concisely, ad shetei Torah sheba'al peh kula sdura b'fi hakol, so that the Torah sheba'al peh could be arranged in everyone's mouth, below kushi, below peiruk, without questions and answers, below ze'em b'ko, ze'em b'ko, not this person says this way, this person says this way, el devarim berurim, clear words, Kravim, Nechayim, B'Piyah Mishpat, correct, and so on and so forth. To the extent that all the laws will be revealed to young and old alike. And in other words, Klal Shel Davar, he says, Kidei Shlo Yeh Adam Tzarech L'Chibur Acher B'Olam. You will not need any other work, but rather from this work alone, you can know the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Did he mean it to be a substitute, or did he mean that people should try to learn Gemara?
So that's what we're going to explain. So he says, and therefore, he writes, L'fikach, therefore, Karasi Shin Machibur Azem Mishnah Torah. I've called it Mishnah Torah, and Mishnah means a repetition of the Torah. It was a very good word. In secular legal literature, you find a restatement, or the restatement of the law of X. So it's really a restatement of the Torah. A person reads Torah Shebechsaf first, and then he reads this, and from this he knows the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh. You don't have to read any other work. So this is a very ambitious program. The Rambam says the reason he wrote the Sefer is that now you don't need anything else. You don't need the Gemara, you don't need the Tosefta, you don't need the Midrashim, nothing. You learn Torah Shebechsaf, you learn Torah Sheba'al Peh, and you learn the Rambam, you don't need any other Sefer, and you mastered the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh. So on this, there's a very famous Hasaga, very famous criticism of the Ravid. And the Ravid says, Amar Avram, Zeh Mechaber, this author, Savar L'Sakein B'lo Sikein. He thought that he would rectify, he didn't rectify. Ki hu ozav derech kol mechaber masher hoyu lefanav. He abandoned the way of all preceding authors. Ki heim heviu raya l'devreim. They brought proofs to their statements. Because what dvar b'shem oimra. And they quoted statements in the names of those who said them. V'oilu b'zatelis gedoyla. And there was a very great benefit from that. Ki pa'amim rabbi siyala alei v'dayan al osir v'hamater lodun o lahater mirayas of makam echad. Sometimes a judge or a halachic decisor will want to rule on the basis of a proof. V'lo yad, he doesn't realize ki yesh godlo mimeno nir lo das acheres makam acher. There may be a greater rabbi who has a proof from elsewhere. Ki cholam afarshim enu m'shavim. Because obviously there's no way you can equate all commentators. And if he knew that the person who disagrees with him is greater, he would back down. But now, I don't know. Why should I argue just because of the Rambam? Right? Who's bigger? Is he bigger or am I bigger? And so on and so forth. So he says that the Rambam, by not quoting his sources and by not giving proofs, didn't achieve what he would have wanted to achieve. So I'd like to share with you the interpretation. I think it's Pasha. Marsha used to say this all the time, as to what the Rambam really meant, and in a sense diffuse the objection of the Ravid. But to fully understand this, we have to understand something about the nature of the mitzvah of learning Torah, which the Rambam writes. When we think of Torah, how big is Torah? How vast is Torah? So we think Torah is infinite. Broader than the sea. No person could master the entire Torah. Yet it's clear from the Rambam that the Rambam holds that Torah is a finite body of knowledge. And listen to this halacha that the Rambam writes. Mi shlo lomdei aviv. If a person's father did not teach him Torah, he's obligated to teach himself when he becomes aware. A person whose father did not teach him Torah is obligated to teach himself when he becomes aware. What about a person whose father taught him Torah? The parent doesn't have to teach himself. What does that mean? Is it possible that my father could have taught me enough Torah that now I'm not obligated to learn myself anymore? This is clear from the Rambam. The Rambam says that the mitzvah to learn Torah is a finite amount of Torah. And it can be demonstrated that this is really the Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, and the basic explanations of the Torah mitzvahs, the basic rules. Torah Shebechsav, and that's Torah Shebal Peh. The broader expansion of the Torah really falls into a third category. And this is clear from what the Rambam writes a little bit later. Everything will become clearer. The Rambam writes like this. A person is obligated to divide his learning time into thirds. Shlish b'Torah Shebechsav. A third Torah Shebechsav. Shlish Torah Shebal Peh. A third Torah Shebal Peh. Ushlish, the final third, Yovin v'Yaskil Achriz Davar Moreshiso. He should try to understand the conclusion from the beginning. V'Yotzi Davar Midavar, and derive X from Y. and compare X to Y. And he should apply the laws of interpretation until he knows how to derive the prohibited, the permitted, etc. And that's called Talmud. So the Rambam says there really are three parts of Torah. There's Torah Shebechsav, this is the text of the Chumash, Tanakh. There's Torah Shebal Peh, which is the basic information. And there's the expansion, which is called Talmud. And the Rambam says, how so? So he says like this, let's say a person is a working man. And I'm just reading this because you'll find this astounding. He's a working man. So how many hours a day does a working man work? And he works 3 hours a day. That's a working man. He's a malach that works 3 hours a day. Now, I find that also, by the way. There are many people I know that work
Union
3 hours a day. They're in their offices 8 hours a day. But they're only working 3 hours a day. Right? And therefore they have 9 hours to study Torah, because if you're only working 3, so 9 you can devote to learning. So those 9 hours, 3 you learn Torah Shebechsav, and 3 Torah Shebal Peh. Uveshalosh, and the last 3 you're mizbeinen b'daito, you reflect love and davar midah. Now he says like this: Divrei Kabbalah Nach is included in Torah Shebechsav. Uperushon, the Perushim of Nach are included in Torah Shebal Peh. V'inyanos and the Pardes, and the subject is called Pardes, which we call Kabbalah, that's included in Talmud. So everything falls into this category. So Rav says, when is this said? This is when the person begins learning. But once he's advanced, and he's already completed Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, he says, so then he should devote small amounts of time to ongoing review. Maybe he'll need specific times to review, and the rest of the time, the majority of the time, he'll devote to Talmud. So there are 3 categories. So when you're reading Tanakh, just reading the Psukim with the most basic explanation, that's called Torah Shebechsav. When you're going through the basic halachas, that's Torah Shebal Peh. The rest is Talmud. Talmud is infinite. But Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh is finite. The obligation of a father to teach his son Torah is Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. Talmud you do on your own. But the obligation of a father to teach his son is a finite body of knowledge, Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shebal Peh. What if your father didn't teach you? So we learn from a pasuk, you're obligated to teach yourself. One might have said, listen, my father didn't teach me, I'm off the hook. If my father taught me Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, then I go off on Talmud on my own. But if my father didn't give me the foundation, so who says I have to engage in Talmud on my own or get myself to the point where I can do Talmud? The answer is yes. Your father didn't teach you, you have to. But this finite body of knowledge, that's Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. That, the Rambam says, became very difficult. Because with all the tsaras and all the difficulties, let alone Talmud, let alone delving into the wisdom and analysis and lumdus, just to get straight the basic halachas of the Torah became virtually impossible. So the Rambam says, therefore I wrote the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is a sefer which concisely presents the entire Torah Shebal Peh. Talmud? No. Talmud it doesn't. It presents the basic halachas of Torah Shebal Peh. So if a person wishes to fulfill this basic requirement of Yidiyas HaTorah, of knowing the Torah, which is Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, that he can do by learning Tanakh and Rambam. He will not need another sefer for Torah Shebal Peh. But for Talmud, if you want to delve into the rationale, the underlying reasons, the lumdus, the svara, to be able to draw conclusions in terms of psak, etc. So of course the Rambam never said that you can rely on the Mishnah Torah alone. For that you have to go back to the Gemara, you have to go back to the Talmud. That goes without saying. That's not what the Rambam meant to say. But the Ravid will jump to a conclusion. He assumed the Rambam was saying literally you can throw away the rest of your library. All you need is the Rambam. The Rambam never said that. The Rambam said that to fulfill the requirement of Torah Shebal Peh, That's all you need. But for Talmud, to delve into the reasons, the svaras, the lamdas, to be able to apply the halachas to novel situations, for that you certainly have to go back to the Gemara and the analysis of the Gemara and see what the underlying rationale is. Now,
we lump don't we lump the Gemara as part of Torah Baal Peh?
As I was saying, the Talmud is much broader than Torah Baal Peh. The Torah Baal Peh is included in it, but it's that much, so much more. Torah Baal Peh, by the Rambam's definition, means the basic halachas of the 613 mitzvahs. The Talmud goes way beyond that.
Right.
Now, what we have to be aware of is this. We have to be aware of, and this is something that is a sad thing, that we may have corrupted the ways of learning. We are putting the cart before the horse often, because we don't have a comprehensive knowledge of Torah Shebechsav. We don't have a comprehensive knowledge of Torah Baal Peh, by the Rambam's definition. We've jumped to Talmud. So a lot of our learning really is at that higher level learning. There was analysis, discussion, of very fine points of Jewish law. But we've neglected the obligation of knowing that finite body of knowledge. There was maybe we should trust the Rambam on that and say, listen, we'll learn the Rambam and we'll know the basic halachas of all the Taryag mitzvahs, and then we'll go into what the Rambam calls Talmud. Unfortunately, that seems to have fallen by the wayside. I think the average person, if you'd ask him what are the basic halachas, what are the Taryag mitzvahs, most people won't even have a clue, what they are. But this is what the Rambam says, and it's doable. It's doable. The Rambam is not it takes time, but it's certainly a doable thing to go through the Rambam and understand the Taryag mitzvahs, and then learn Gemara and everything else to fulfill the obligation of Talmud as well. But to know the basics, the Rambam probably we should assume is correct. If you learn the Rambam, you'll get the basics. Okay, so this is something that we have to be mindful of, that Shavuos is coming, and we make a commitment to Kabbalah Torah. Part of that commitment has to be that what are we doing to bring ourselves closer to that goal of Yidiyas Torah, of knowing the Torah. And it's not enough just to spend time. The time has to be used effectively, and we all should give thought to exactly what are we doing, so that we could say, yes, we've covered that finite body of knowledge, which is obligatory, and not just spend time, learning, but not bringing ourselves closer to the desired goal.
Is that just memory, though? Because if you're not going to delve deeper into it, it's not memory. You never can understand it. You need to want to know why or not.
Well, I think this you're raising a point that it is hard to remember. But if you don't try, you're not going to cover it either, right? That was to say, I have to learn painstakingly slow with all the lamdas, because otherwise I won't understand. I won't remember. Maybe a cap out. Maybe it's worthwhile to try to cover more material. And the first time around you won't remember that much. After that you'll remember more. Right? Okay, everyone, next week is a special program. We'll see you 2 weeks from today. Everyone have a very, very happy Shavuos.